We are recording the interview of Arthur King. This interview is being conducted by Jeremy Tack and Amber Meyer from the Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University in the Veterans and Military Center. It is 2:11 p.m. on August 3rd, 2018. Arthur, thank you for being with us.
It's good to be here.
Let's start off
At
with
my age, it's good to be anywhere.
let's start off with where and when were you born?
I was born in 1938, February 10th, and I was born in rural Hale County, Alabama.
Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My father was Harvey King, who worked as we had several phases of changes in the South. But we started out as sharecroppers on cotton farms primarily.
Mm-hmm.
Then we moved on to farm hands on first dairy farms and
Mm-hmm.
then other enterprise farms. And it was, as you might imagine, in that era,
Mm-hmm.
things were changing fairly rapidly in terms of earnings potentials and things
Mm-hmm.
like that.
What about your mother?
My mother was Elizabeth King.
Mm-hmm.
The two of my parents were I guess we'll talk later about my siblings, but I was the second child in that union.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about your siblings.
My oldest brother is named Albert King. Interestingly, I'll say this up front because it is fairly remarkable to me.
Mm-hmm.
My mother had 11 children.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
The oldest one is now 85, and all of them are still alive.
Mm-hmm.
So, we've survived well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was the breeding or the food, but we got through it. So my oldest brother is Albert, who is 4 years older than I. I have a sister, Helen, who is next to me, and Helen is 2 years younger than I am.
Mm-hmm.
Flora is 2 years younger than Helen, and let's see, and then I guess we skipped to Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Who is 2 years younger than Flora.
Mm-hmm.
James is about 2 years younger than Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Alice is about a year younger than James.
Mm-hmm.
Elijah is 2 years younger than Alice. Emma is 3 years younger than, where did I stop? It's not easy to remember now. Emma is 3 years younger than James. I think that's what I should say, and then Elijah,
Mm-hmm.
and then 2 years later Patricia.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I've counted off to 11.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you have family reunions? You all get
We
together?
have, interestingly, I don't want to make this a sideshow, but interestingly, my mother in 1973 said, in a rather serious voice, I want to see all my children together one more time before I die.
Mm-hmm.
We started having reunions that next year, and every second year since then, we've had a family reunion.
Huh.
We do it on odd years. The last one was 2 weeks ago in Minneapolis. One of my nieces hosted that reunion, so we move around all over the country now, and we are pretty much into this reunion thing. Of course, both of our parents are dead now. But we have kept it going and intend to keep it going as long as we can.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Do you have any other family members that served in the military?
No, none of my other family members served. None of my brothers or sisters served. I'm sorry, I did have James did serve.
Okay.
Served during the Vietnam era, an enlistment that lasted the normal term. I think it was 3 years.
And what branch was he in?
He was in the Army.
Army. So you joined the Air Force.
Yes.
What year?
1962, accessed through the ROTC program at Tuskegee.
Okay. And what led to that decision? Why'd you want to do that?
Get off the farm.
Simple
It
enough.
was an easy decision. Really, I had a desire to do better. Wanted to do better. I was a fairly decent student. I went to Tuskegee and on the 5-year plan, which is a program that allowed the student to work full-time for the first 2 years and go to class part-time and reverse that for the last 3 years and get close to a degree at the end with financial aid. And Tuskegee was an institution that believed in the industrial model of education, according to the philosophy of Booker T. Washington. So I was able to get out of there in 5 years with an ROTC commission.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about ROTC. What was that like?
It was a heady time. As a farm boy, not knowing much about how the world worked, it was a good introduction to discipline and to leadership and to doing one's best. There was always somebody gaining on you, so if you wanted to succeed, you had to put out your best effort. And so I learned that lesson at Tuskegee. I also learned that when you do well, you get accolades, and that's not bad. Yeah.
Do you have any instructors during that time or professors that stood out to you?
Yeah, there were several. Colonel Hooks Jones was my professor of air science. He was a pilot and a Tuskegee Airman, and did an excellent job of leading that ROTC detachment. Captain Norman Cave was one of my ROTC instructors. Captain Tim Body, who later went on to earn a star, I believe, was one of my instructors. I remember those people because they were they set the tone for what an Air Force officer ought to be.
So what was the feeling like when you graduated and you got that commission?
I was almost incredulous, in fact. I mean, from where I had come to being commissioned in the United States Air Force was a major accomplishment in my mind. I'll be eternally grateful to Tuskegee for giving me the opportunity to do that. I tried to reciprocate in some small ways to that institution because, but for Tuskegee, I would not have been able to go to college. There were no student loans or scholarships to speak of in those days. One either sank or swam on one's money, and I didn't have money, so I was gonna. But for the 5-year plan, I would not have been able to go to college. So I'm eternally grateful for that. I think that the thing that Tuskegee taught me also was in connection with Booker T. Washington's philosophy that striving and achieving was an important asset to have in young people who were coming of age, let's say.
All right, so upon graduating and getting your commission, what was your first assignment?
My first assignment was at Edwards Air Force Base, California, as an administrative officer in a transportation squadron. I was assigned to that squadron, which was headed by a lieutenant colonel. navigator who, again, sort of molded me because it was my first professional duty.
Mm-hmm.
I was there for about 2.5 years, as I recall,
Mm-hmm.
before I got my orders to Vietnam, maybe 3 years.
So tell me about, let's talk about Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
What was the feeling like when you got orders for Vietnam?
It's interesting. I got this. It was just about my birthday, and I'm blanking on the year. I could calculate it, but it's not terribly important. But it was right around my birthday. I got this letter in the mail from the Department of Defense,
Mm-hmm.
United States Air Force, and I said, "Oh, these people remember my birthday." It turns out it was my alert notice that I was going to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
I had just recently had a young son. He was almost a year old, and I was to go to Fort Ben Harris and get postal training, and then on to Vietnam. And you think your question was talk about a little bit about Vietnam and that experience. I was put in charge of the post office at Tan Son Nhut Air Base, which was the main entry point for troops and units into Vietnam, and responsible largely for for money order operation. Lots of mail. We would get big bags of mail for Army units that were on the way from the States, and they'd get there a month, sometimes 2 months after we had the mail. But it was a heady time for me. It was I was one of the last groups of people who were permitted to live off the economy on the economy instead of living on base at Tan Son Nhut. And that was an interesting experience. It taught me a lot about my own leadership ability, and it taught me about how war is organized, because there's nothing like the smell of death.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what year was this? About 65? Or?
I'm sorry?
What year was this?
I went on active duty in 1962. I went to Vietnam in 65.
65. And how long were you there?
A year.
1 year.
Mm-hmm. And by the time I left, there was a captain in my unit who shipped out about 4 months before I did.
Mm-hmm.
So I became detachment commander for the detachment that was at Tan Son Nhut and Bien Hoa, about 20, 30 miles away.
And you mentioned you had a son, right?
Yes, I have 2 sons now. My oldest one was born at Edwards Air Force Base.
Did you have a wife at the time?
Yeah, she was with me.
What did she think about you going to Vietnam?
Well, nobody is terribly excited about having somebody that you care about going to war, obviously. But she understood that it was part of my commitment. That was part of the thing. It's why I signed up. My wife was a teacher. When I went on active duty, she stayed home, and she had already signed a contract for the next year teaching, and so she taught in the public school system. And in Alabama, and she joined me after I had been there about a year, at the end of the school year, May, June of what it would have been 63, I guess. Yeah.
Did you keep in contact with your wife when you were in Vietnam?
Oh yeah, yeah. I still have those little tapes.
Tapes, yeah. That's about the next. When you returned from Vietnam, what was that experience like?
Well, I came back from Vietnam a little bit bitter about the Air Force. In fact, I did my forecast. I was a biology major, undergraduate, and I did my forecast 6 months into my tour for a biomedical assignment. I was looking at Brooks Hospital or one of those facilities in San Antonio as a possibility, because I wanted to work on a master's degree in biology, my undergraduate major. Well, as it turns out, a month before I was, 2 months before I was supposed to rotate, I noticed that they lost my forecast papers. So I wound up being assigned to missile crew duty in South Dakota, at Ellsworth Air Force Base, and I was really frustrated about that. I had decided that I was going to get out of the Air Force because I didn't particularly like the idea of working on Minuteman missiles, and as it turns out, it worked out in my favor because I had actually interviewed and taken a civilian job to get out. And then I decided I would investigate a master's degree that was being offered to Minuteman missile officers through the local AFA detachment. They had each of these bases in the system had a master's degree, so sort of associated with business administration. And I was offered that the opportunity was there to enroll in one of these programs and in 4 years one could complete all of the coursework for a master's degree, usually, as I say, in business. The one in South Dakota was offered by South Dakota State. South Dakota did not have an institution at that time that offered an MBA. So I wound up getting enrolling in that program. Decided I was going to stay on active duty, get the degree, and then I was going to get out. I got through just as I was finishing the degree. My tour was coming to an end, and the Air Force Academy was recruiting for instructors, and specifically. Somebody in the Air Force had decided that diversity was important at the Air Force Academy, and so I was recruited and interviewed went down to the academy interview. By this time, we had our second son, and I was hired to go onto that faculty to teach economics because my degree in economics just fit the bill for what they were doing. Okay. And so I did that tour at the Air Force Academy. About a year and a half into the tour, I had the opportunity to go up to the University of Colorado to finish the coursework for my doctorate, and completed all of that, including the exams, just in time to leave and go to the Armed Forces Staff College at Norfolk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me what the experience was like at the Air Force Academy. Now that you're in a teaching role, then. Yeah,
it was it was heady. I mean, it was really heady. To be responsible for a classroom of cadets, the future leaders of the Air Force, was I thought an awesome responsibility, and so I took it very seriously. Obviously, I wanted to get the doctorate because I thought that was important for my children to see as a model, a role of what they should try to strive for. And so I enjoyed teaching. I learned a style that worked for me. I had some of the smartest kids in the world for students, and I tried to challenge them. And it worked out. It worked out really well. And as I said, the last year, well, the third year of my tour there, a 4-year tour, I was actually up at the University of Colorado, not on campus, getting ready to finish my degree.
And then, where did you say you went after that? You went to Norfolk?
No, after the Air Force Academy, I came here to write Patterson. Initially in Logistics Command. I was just on the throes. I had finished all my coursework and taken my comprehensive exams, as a matter of fact. And so I was basically had qualified for the doctoral degree, which I went back to Boulder and took part in the ceremony, graduation ceremony, primarily, again, so that my kids could see this. It was important for them to see it. But I came here for a year and a half. I worked in Logistics Command as a team that was brought in to try and analyze the logistical processes associated with fighting the 2.5 wars that the Air Force had, the Department of Defense had decided we ought to be ready to fight. I did that for a year and a half, and then went to AFIT to teach economics for the rest of my time in the Air Force.
Okay, a lot of teaching then.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in the classroom. And I taught a couple of courses adjunct at Wright State, Central Michigan University.
Oh, really?
I actually taught a couple of courses here at Wright State. I'm sorry, got that wrong. Wright State, I taught at the Central Michigan University, University of Dayton, adjunct before I got my full-time teaching job at AFIT.
Okay, wow. What was, out of all your service, what was your proudest moment?
The proudest moment from the standpoint of I think marching in that procession and getting a doctoral degree was as good as I ever felt about myself. Yeah.
Do you currently live here, or?
I live in Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
Okay.
Winston-Salem. We're here for
for the reunion.
Yeah, Cold War Eagles reunion. This is a group that we were stationed, people that we were stationed with in the early '60s. In my first assignment at Ellsworth.
Ellsworth, okay.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned you did work with the Minuteman missiles.
I was on Minuteman missile crew for 4 years. Yes.
What was that like?
It was really a good time in a lot of ways. It had its challenges also. I mentioned that my second child was born while we were at Ellsworth. As it turns out, I had a 4-year-old basically, and my wife had difficulties with both pregnancies to the point where she stayed in the hospital about 4 months each time. And so I had this 4-year-old, almost 4-year-old. I was on missile crew duty. You had friends who would keep him overnight when I had to go out on alert. But I was on instructor crew and then standardization crew, which reduced the number of overnights that I had to be away on missile crew duty. So then I was able to take care of him and make sure that she was okay as well. And so it was a good lesson in persistence, I think. Yeah.
Then when you retired, what was your move after that? What would you?
I retired in 1982, and I decided that I was going to look at some teaching jobs because I had a son who was graduating from college that year, and I wanted to help him go to college, and the Air Force salary wasn't going to get it. So I had been looking around. I said, well, I'd look this year in 1982, and then my AFIT assignment was going to be up in 1983, and I would get out at that time. But I was just going to do some interviews and see what that process looked like. Turns out one of my colleagues and friends who also taught at AFIT had retired in '81 and gone to Baylor University. And I was talking with him one night, and he said, "How's it down there?" He says, "Oh man, it's better than sliced bread." So I said, "Okay, let me just take a look at this thing." So I set up some interviews, not only with Baylor but several other places, and as luck would have it, Baylor offered me what I thought was a relatively decent contract to come in and teach economics at Baylor. Mm-hmm. And so I accepted that. My son decided he was going to go to Stanford, which nullified the economic advantage right away. But it was a good thing to do. Mm-hmm. So I wound up on the economics faculty at Baylor for 11 years.
Okay.
Total.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that again, one of the difficulties that one always has in these things, is this notion of race and ethnicity. Mm-hmm. They only had one African American professor when I went to Baylor. Mm-hmm. One. You know? Yeah. And that, as stark as that was, I was able during that tour. I want to say this because I think it's important mm-hmm. for a perspective on who I am. I was able, with the help of the president appointed me director of minority affairs for the mm-hmm. university with the express charge to increase diversity in Baylor University, mm-hmm. both faculty, staff, and students. And we were able to do that mm-hmm. Over the next 11 years. I was very, very pleased with how that all played out mm-hmm. because I could see from where we came over that period mm-hmm. to where we were when I left Baylor. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I did that for, like I say, for 11 years, and for when I did leave, I left to go initially to the ACE Fellows for American Council of Education Fellows Program, okay. which was a program designed to try and increase the potential for people to move into upper levels of administration, mm-hmm. president, vice president, et cetera.
All right. Harking back to the Air Force, mm-hmm. did you ever experience any adversity because of your race in the service?
Yeah, I did. I two times I got bad, I think undeservedly bad mm-hmm. officer effectiveness reports. One while I was in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. I'll tell this story because I think it's instructive for leadership information and to just talk about how the world works. Mm-hmm. I had a captain, as I noted, who rotated 6 months or so. I don't know, maybe 3 months before I did, and I had I was running a post office at Tonsonnet. One of the difficulties in that situation was that if a money order clerk mm-hmm. made a mistake and had more money than he should have had at mm-hmm. the end of the day, mm-hmm. he had to turn it in. If he made a mistake and came up short, he had to pay the difference. Mm-hmm. So I had a bunch of 18, 20-year-olds selling money orders, mm-hmm. millions of dollars worth of money orders. And they were disgruntled. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to simply call them together and say, look, guys, it's important that you take the time to do your job well mm-hmm. so that you don't have these discrepancies because the rules are not going to change. Mm-hmm. Well, my commander, my detachment commander heard about it, my mm-hmm. boss. And he thought that was the worst thing that I could do to bring these young people together to talk about their deficiencies. Mm-hmm. So he gave me a fairly poor OER. Mm-hmm. As a result, I think it was partly racial. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. I think it was who he was and what he saw. There was one other time, and I think your question was disappointments and
adversity.
Adversity. When I got out of Armed Forces Staff College, I went to Davis Monthan Air Force Base. I think I skipped that one incidentally. As a logistics officer, chief logistics officer in a fighter squadron. And one of the things that happened to me in that era was that the Air Force came up with the forced distribution system for officer effectiveness reports. I mean, here I am, a non-rated guy in a fighter squadron. A lot of majors in the squadrons, like me, were not able to get. The commander could not get all of those people into the 1 or 2 category. So you get everybody. The first 2 were controlled. Everything else was, and so I got a 3 on my OER, just coming coming into that business, and it hurt my career. I think. I think I could have probably, and I don't know that was ethnically driven completely, but I think that had something to do with it as well.
Did your military service, did it change your outlook on life at all?
No, I don't think so. Not in the broad sense. I think that what I understood from chopping cotton in Alabama to teaching at Baylor and running a business school later. I think that what I learned was that I would say this anyway. Sometimes you're the dog, and sometimes you're the tree. You know, it's just the way the world is, and you can't get down on yourself because bad things happen to you. And so I think that what I learned over my life in the Air Force and after is that sometimes bad things just happen to good people, and you know you just have to look within yourself and do the best you can with what you have.
Well, start wrapping up here. In professional career, I'm quite fascinated. What message would you like to leave for future generations that might be viewing this interview?
I think in this political time, the message I would like to leave to people is that democracy is a system that is as good as it gets on this earth. And that if we don't pay attention to the knitting and doing the things that benefit the greater good, we will be doing a disservice to all of the brave men and women who've died fighting for this country.
Well, all right. Thank you so much, Arthur. Appreciate it. And thank you for your service. Do you have any questions?
No, I'm very impressed.
Well, thank you. I don't, I hope I didn't sound boastful, but
No,
that's the way people should.
Yeah. All right, that concludes the interview of Arthur King. Thanks.
Thank you.